Good evening, everyone. We are back in Isaiah chapter 9. We are starting from verse 2 because we completed verse 1 yesterday. I had indicated to you that in the Hebrew Old Testament, the break point is actually in chapter 9, verse 1, which is a natural ending in the Hebrew. In our English Bibles, we actually ended chapter 8, one verse earlier. As such, in the Hebrew Bible, you find that for chapter 9, the verse numberings would be a little out of sync. Now, this would be something which many of us may not know. Reason being is that we actually don't look at the Hebrew Old Testament, but this is just information that you may be interested for future purposes. Now, for the purpose of chapter 9, verse 2 onwards, there is a little bit of a background which I think we need to be aware of. We are still at the time of Ahaz, and so from chapter 7 and chapter 8, it gave us the sign that God is going to deliver Ahaz. Even though he was a bad king, God is going to provide the deliverance. And so God does that because he gave a promise and a covenant to David that even when there is a bad king like Ahaz, God is not going to give up on his people. And hence we saw a number of things that happened in chapter 8. But for chapter 9, the interesting background that we should see would be about Hezekiah. It spans from Ahaz to Hezekiah, from the time where that God is using the Assyrians as the rod of men to teach Israel a lesson. And so during the times of Ahaz, you find the Assyrians coming in, and then into the early years of Hezekiah, the Assyrian kings also came in right up to year 6 when they took away all the 10 tribes or the 10 parcels of land, the people who were in the 10 parcels of land away. Now, after that, the Assyrians didn't give up. Now, one of the things you need to understand is at this point in time, the Assyrians are big and bold. They would conquer whatever they see. And you could imagine, if you've taken Israel, why not Judah? Why not Judah? And that was what happened. And Sennacherib came after Judah. And so yesterday we read that Judah was with the flood to her neck. And that's what I want to point out to you today. Let's look at 2 Kings chapter 19, reading from verse 29. This is 2 Kings chapter 19. Now, this is a very important chapter. The reason why it's an important chapter is because it is one of those rare occasions where God defended Judah by himself without using the armies of Hezekiah. And so this is a time when King Sennacherib has really, like the flood, like the prophecy goes yesterday, that the flood waters have come over the banks and he has reached to the breadth of the land, and the water has risen to the neck of Judah. And with this, you find that Hezekiah and everybody else is terrified of losing Judah to Sennacherib. And so in 2 Kings chapter 19, he prayed to God to save the people. Now, one of the things that you must realize is he is the Hezekiah is the son of Ahaz. Ahaz is a really bad king. And even as bad kings go, God protected the land from Redzin and Pekah. Now, we find that Hezekiah was a great king. He turned the kingdom around. He brought back the reading of the Torah. He brought back the sacrifices. He brought back the feasts. However, it came to a point in time when Sennacherib overflowed the land. He prayed to God to save. And this is in the 14th year. The 14th year of Hezekiah. And so if you read with me, these are the prophecies given to Hezekiah, that there will be a remnant that will escape the house of Judah. Right now, what they see is Sennacherib is all over the place except for Jerusalem. And so God says, this is a sign to you. This is what's going to happen. You will continue to eat this year, next year, and the third year. Plant your vineyards, eat the fruit of them. But right now, he can't see it. The remnant who has escaped of the house of Judah shall take root downwards and bear fruit upwards. But most importantly, the sign and the prophecy was verse 31. For out of Jerusalem shall go a remnant, and those who escape from Mount Zion, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Therefore, the king of the Lord, the Lord says concerning the king of Assyria, he will not come into the city. He will not shoot an arrow. He will not come even with a shield. He will not build a siege mound around it. But the surprising prophecy is this: by the way that he came, he shall return. He shall not come into this city, says the Lord. Verse 34, please pay attention. I will defend the city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. So God has promised David, just as he defended and protected Ahaz, even when Hezekiah, a good king, Hezekiah couldn't fight Sennacherib, but God will. Now, Sennacherib has surrounded Jerusalem with 185,000 troops. Just imagine, 185,000 troops is so big that you and I can't imagine. And as it comes through the land and surrounds Jerusalem, it literally feels like you're being choked. And the flood and the tsunami has come. Now read with me in verse 35. And it came to pass on a certain night that the angel of the Lord went out and killed the camp of the Syrians. Look at this. 185,000. Next day, when the people woke up, there were corpses all dead. Sennacherib went back, remained in Nineveh. The surprising thing was, he was assassinated by his sons, struck him down with the sword. I wanted to leave this as a strong impression for you that not only in the Hezekiah's time that God's name was upheld, the obedience of the people were upheld, the temple was upheld, the Levites were upheld, the feasts were upheld. But yet, and also God defended. And so God sent the angel of the Lord to destroy 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. And that is how powerful angels of God are. And so this would be the backdrop. Now, this is happening in the future. right? Happening in the future. But just understand why in Isaiah these things are said. So we begin in chapter 9, verse 2. The people who walked in darkness, those in Judah, right, have seen a great light. The great light when Sennacherib was destroyed, was kicked back, was defeated by God. Those who dwell in the land of the shadow of death. I'm sure you have heard these phrases. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The idea in this case, when they use this phrase, shadow of death, literally gives them or gives us an understanding that they were really facing death, that the shadow of death is literally upon them. And then they saw the light as it shined. Now, this great light, as I indicated to you, it is also an imagery to say that God promised them and God delivered them. You have multiplied the nation, increased its joy. They rejoice before you according to the joy of harvest, when men rejoice and they divide their spoil. Well, understand that this is a time where they are rejoicing because Sennacherib has been chased out. Now, as we go through this next passages in chapter 9 of Isaiah, I want all of us to be aware that what I'm trying to do is really to show you the Hebrew underneath. And I guess you have seen oftentimes the underlying Hebrew may not line up very well with our English translation. Now, I am not here to explain why, and I don't know what and why they did that. And every translation does it differently. And it's not easy to translate Hebrew to English. And that's what I have wanted to show you. And I'm still going to show you because that's the purpose of our study. Look at the grammar. Look at the linguistic. And then look at the history. And that's all I want to show you. The interpretation are things which I would leave for you to do in your homework. So let's continue with our understanding of the Hebrew. For you have broken the yoke of his burden, the staff of his shoulder. Now in verse 4, the idea of yoke is something that's imposed on an oxen, right? So it is a burden. The yoke of his burden is talking about the yoke of the load, okay? Now, we need to understand that in English, we have the same word used differently. So this is the burden and this is the load. Now, it's still the same English word. The yoke as the instrument that's placed around the neck of an ox, and it could be used to carry a burden. So another word would be the burden of his load, and you have broken that, and the staff of his shoulder. Now the staff here would mean a rod of his shoulder. The rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Gideon. Now, what is important was for us to understand is this. God is saying, God has removed the burden over the backs of Judah, or he will do that. And the staff on his shoulder, the oppressor would be the Assyrians, right? As in the day of Gideon. So what is so special about this? So you need to go back to Judges chapter 7. And in verse 13, God did something similar as well. That the angels of the Lord came at the time of Gideon, and in one night, right, how many people of the Midianites died? And in this case, 185,000 of the Assyrians died. And so this is talking about the background of that event of Hezekiah. For every warrior sandal from the noisy battle, the garment rolled in blood will be used for burning, fuel, and of fire. This is an imagery that there is a lot of leftovers. Leftovers of what? Leftovers of the things of the warriors. Why? Because remember, 185,000 soldiers died. Can you imagine how many carcasses are there? I would imagine the place would have all kinds of things in the battlefield. And that's what verse 5 is talking about. When we come to verse 6, there is some challenges in the Hebrew. And so let me first read this, and then I will show you some of the translations. It says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." And hence, one of the challenges we have is in the underlying translation. Let me just show you a slide. Now, in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, or Isaiah chapter 9, verse 5 in the Hebrew text says this. We just read this, and this is how we have often read it. Now, on this side here, if you take a look, we are looking at the English translation of the Greek Old Testament. Now, I'm not using the Greek Old Testament to teach. I'm just using it for the purpose of this verse to show you how different it can be from different translations. So the Greek would say, "For a child was born, and a son was given, and of whom the sovereignty became, and his name is called." And you notice that all these are supposed to tie together, but it kind of not tie together, because there seems to be a whole lot more names or words in the Greek than in our modern ESV, NIV, or the King James. Now, in the Hebrew, reads a bit differently. It says, "For a child has been born," which is similar to the Greek, "and a son is given," a son was given, which is also similar right here. "And the authority was placed," and that would be the same, "and called his name Sar Shalom." And so the way that the Hebrew structures it linguistically anyways, was to use a broad string of words that refer to the name. It is similar to how we read yesterday's name. If you remember yesterday's name, Isaiah's son's name was Maher Shalal Hashbat. And that is a whole mouthful, right? A whole mouthful. But in today's chapter 9, verse 6 or 9:5 in the Hebrew, it appears to us that in the linguistic of it, it is Pele Yoetz El Gibor Aviad, and called his name, this child, Sar Shalom. And here is a guide to the translation. And so what I want to show you is the differences in that translation. One is that this is in the past tense. This is in the present tense. is given, is born, will be a future tense, will be called in a future tense, as you can see. So you must be able to see the differences in the translations, right? Has been, was placed, given. In the Greek, was born, was given, became. And so we have a challenge now in representing the grammar of the verse. Here we have the verse before us, and so I just want to highlight to you these the grammar, and these are normally in the past tense. And then we have this string of words that is considered the name of God, that it is God who gave this name, and the name Prince of Peace, Sar Shalom, is about the child. And how would this work in the linguistic format? The linguistic format essentially would say that unto us a child is born, and that is born already. And this would refer to Hezekiah. Because in his days, he is called the Prince of Peace. The name Hezekiah is the might of God. And some will call him the mighty God. But that's not the issue. All these names like Yeshayahu, Hezekiah, the might of God, or the mighty God, doesn't mean that Hezekiah is God, right? People have names of God embedded into their name. It's a reminder of who God is. And so this one would be right here. This whole chunk is this, and will call. Not will call, sorry. Call his name. And that would be the translation of this verse. And based on the background that we have been given, as we were there since verse 2 all the way down to verse 5, it speaks of Hezekiah as a celebration. And to say that at that point in time, you need to put yourself at that point in time, right? Of Hezekiah, that the people are celebratory, and this would be bringing back the glorious days of David. And it would be the throne of David restored as it appears, right? And of the increase of his government, there will be no end upon the throne of David and his kingdom, in order to establish it with judgment and justice from that time and even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So the idea here really gives us, from the text at least, if it refers to Hezekiah, then this is with referring to that point in time that you can actually see. So that is the historical view of it. Now, in the interpretation of it, you will have to deal with the modern English translation, and you have to map it with the Hebrew, and you have to then do your homework to try to balance that out. And I will leave that homework for you. I am just trying to unveil the underlying Hebrew. Now in verse 8, it continues, because it's now back into a situation of talking about the northern kingdom. And the northern kingdom hasn't been destroyed yet. And so this is another narrative of that point in time. And one of the challenges in Isaiah is that every chunk of it is not a chronology, and that's what frustrates most people, because you read it and it goes forward and backwards. And hence, I'm now pointing to you that now we're talking about Israel. Just now, we were talking about Judah. And so God sent a word against Jacob, and it has fallen on Israel. All the people will know Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, who say in pride and arrogance of heart. Verse 9, in pride. In pride really means to swell up. And then arrogance of heart is about greatness of heart. Now, obviously, you find that much of these expressions are quite oriental. When your heart grows big, right? When your pride, it's called pride when your mind is swelled up, right? It's a rising haughtiness, right? That's pride. And so that is what Ephraim, Samaria, Israel, all of these are the same. They are with reference to the northern kingdom. And this is the declaration. The bricks have fallen down. We will rebuild with hewn stones, the sycamores. These are trees. If you remember Zacchaeus, the sycamore trees are cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. And this will come from Lebanon. Cedars come from that. And cedars are big trees, much bigger than sycamores. Now, this is what they will declare, right? They will declare that they're going to rebuild everything again, even after the previous attacks of the Assyrians. Therefore, the Lord shall set up the adversaries of Redzin against him and spur his enemies on. What is God setting up? The Assyrians. One of the things you find is that God used the Assyrians because the character of the Assyrians is never ending. They will keep coming. And so it says the Syrians before, the Philistines behind, and they shall devour Israel with an open mouth. So what basically you find is Israel will be surrounded by enemies. We have Syrians, and then we have Philistines on this side. Now, Judah is staying quiet at the bottom, not doing anything. The adversaries of Redzin will be coming all the way, and this would be the Assyrians. Now, this is another important expression. His anger is not turned away, his hand is stretched out still. The idea of anger here is his nose. Now, in the Hebrew, I know you don't see this in the English, but in the Hebrew, the word anger is actually nose. And this is the reason why it's translated as anger is because the word nose is used to depict anger, that when a person is angry, you look at the nose, and the nose is flaring, that's anger. And so in the English, we translate it as anger. But in the Hebrew, it is said that the nose will not return, will not turn away, will not return, meaning God's anger is not going to return to, God's nose is not going to return to a point where he is not angry, right? His hand, the hand noun is a sign of power. As you know, the Hebrew loves to use body parts. And it says here, the hand is extended. Let me try to draw this. This is a picture of the extended hand. Now, the reason why I wanted to point this out to you is this. When God is angry, it says here, this is an A and B, by the way. It's about God's anger, that it is still enforcing the rod of men by the Assyrians. All right. But the picture of his hand stretched out, extended, it's a picture. Nevertheless, it's not God's hand literally stretched out, but the picture of his hand stretched out is equivalent to his anger. Because when God is angry, he is sending the rod of men upon the nations or his people. And so the idea here is this entire disciplinary action is still enforced. Now, if you recall, when Moses was beside the Red Sea, God says, stretch your hand. Well, stretching your hand, not that there is any magical powers, but it's symbolic. I mean, symbolism and imagery is very powerful in Hebrew. And so when you stretch out your hand, you can see that it's as if that power is coming out of your hand, that something is going to happen. And so this whole picture here is showing that God is still angry. It's not returned to a calm state. His hand is still stretched out, meaning the strikes by God is still coming. It's not about to end. For the people, do not turn to him who strikes them. Outstretched hand is to strike. Strike means what? Well, I guess you can say to beat them, to scourge them. And so you are seeing the Assyrians as God's rotan, trying to teach the people. For the people, do not turn to him. Turn is return. Shuv. Now, I've mentioned to you before, shuv is really to come back to where you originally was. The people were originally God's obedient people, and they have gone away, and then God has sent the Assyrians to them. And so while God is using the rotan to strike them, they did not come back or repent, nor do they seek the Lord of hosts. And so you can see this as another A and B. Return and seek God is to come back to God. And I've mentioned to you many times, God is not happy disciplining his people. I can tell you that. And as parents, you will know that too, that it is not sheer joy to take out the cane and beat your children. But it has to be done. Why? It needs to be done because the hope that God is using the rod is to show them this relationship between father and son, which I showed you in 2 Samuel chapter 7, that God will want to discipline him and hope that he will return. You see this? Discipline is always with the hope to return, to seek God. But they did not. And that became the problem. Therefore, the Lord will cut off head and tail from Israel. Northern kingdom, head and tail, the kings as well as the people, the palm branch and bulrush in one day. And this is an emphasis that God is tired of them. But while God is disciplining, the time has never ended that God is waiting for them to return and to seek God. The elder, honorable, he's the head. The prophet, he's the tail. The leaders are whom God is holding responsible. The leaders of this people cause them to err, and those who are led by them are destroyed. It's two sides of the same coin. I think you would be able to see leaders and those who are led each have their own responsibility. Just like I teach And I have a responsibility. And when you learn, you have a responsibility. You need to verify, you need to check, and you need to understand, and you need to come to your own terms. I have a responsibility to be faithful to the text and try to show you what the Hebrew means. Exactly in verse 16, the leaders of this people were not accountable, they were not responsible. In verse 16, it says it caused them to err. Now, you would know that in the Hebrew, err is an abstract term. What would be the concrete term? To cause to wander away. That would be the concrete meaning of to err. It is not a cross. It is an actual behavior and action that these leaders were doing. They were causing the people to wander away. And those who are led by them, meaning the people themselves, are destroyed. Now, this is another interesting idea. What is destroyed? It actually means be swallowed up. And so this whole idea of leaders and people being led are important. And so each have to do their responsible, accountable actions. God doesn't just judge the leaders, God also judges the people. And so God is actually holding everyone accountable and responsible. Therefore, the Lord will have no joy in their young men, nor have mercy on their fatherless and widows. Everyone is a hypocrite and evildoer. Every mouth speaks folly. First of all, no joy. No joy means do not rejoice. God doesn't celebrate with their young man, Bachor. No, the young man is actually people who can really serve God. He will not have mercy on the fatherless. The fatherless will be orphans. Widows would be no man, no husband. And everyone is a hypocrite. What do you mean hypocrite? Everyone is, well, you'd say impious. People who are no longer religious, godless. They are also called evildoer, one who will do evil. And so the idea is, isn't God there to defend the orphans and the widows and the weak? But verse 17 seems to say the opposite. The answer is actually yes. God will defend the orphans, the widows, the those in need, and require the people to take care of them. But in this particular case, they are called hypocrites. They are called evildoers. And it says, everyone, every mouth speaks folly. What is folly? Senselessness. It doesn't make sense. And in some cases, you can actually use this word as crime, which means that every mouth speaks criminally, and it's really against God. For all this, his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. And so we have a repeat of this set of words. For the wickedness burns as the fire, it devours briars and thorns, and kindle thickets of the forest, mount up like rising smoke. Now, this is another imagery. Wickedness, in this case, wickedness is Russia, those who walk away from God, they will burn. And the word burn is I would say it's kindle, when the flame is up, kindles as the fire. Fire is ash, the briars, thorn bush, and the thorny weeds. This is a thorn bush. Now, we don't get all these plants here, so I guess you need to just imagine that thorns here are the thorn weeds, maybe like mimosa. The briars or thorn bushes are actually big bushes with many leaves, very leafy, but the branches is like rose branches with thorns, and those thorns is probably 3 to 5 times the length of the rose thorns. And those of you who've been to Israel, you would be able to see some of these. They look nice on the outside, but just don't go near it. And so God says, the wickedness burns as fire. The idea of those who walk away, it will devour. This whole thing will eat up things which nobody wants. And they shall mount up like rising smoke. That smoke that's rising up through the wrath of the Lord of hosts. This is literally the anger. This is the anger. This is the fury. This is a seldom used word, but I guess you need to look at this as the outburst of God's fury. I would prefer to use the word fury than wrath, because we don't get this extreme picture of wrath. But fury, maybe you can see that, the fury of the volcano, right? And God is, I guess the imagery I'm trying to paint here from the Hebrew is that God is really, really angry. The land is burned up, the people as fire for the fuel for the fire. No man shall spare his brother. He shall snatch on the right hand and be hungry. He shall devour the left hand and not be satisfied. The picture here is there will be nothing to satisfy the burning, the fire, the picture of the fire that's going to come through the land. Whether it's your right hand, your left hand, very similar to Chinese, right? On the left hand, on the right hand, every man will eat of his own arm. There will be nothing that is enough, because as God comes through the land, no one will be satisfied. Manasseh will devour Ephraim. Ephraim will devour Manasseh. Together they will be against Judah. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. What is the picture that God is leaving here would be this, that he is painting a picture that he is extremely angry. Now, I guess the word is very gentle, extremely angry. But the picture here is like I guess the Australian bushfire, or the San Francisco, LA bushfire, that it keeps burning, it's persistent. Once it starts, it's very hard to end. And it's burning through. And then you get people that's short of food, that you'll be hungry, you will not be satisfied. You eat your own, also you're not satisfied. And then you will go after Judah. And so that would be the picture here. So I'm trying to help you see that the Hebrew gives us the imagery. And the imagery is very, I guess if you understand Chinese, and then you would understand this imagery. The imagery is the concept of how angry God is with them. And God is using the Assyrian rotan. And that is extremely, extremely painful. We end chapter 9.